Hola, buenos días. Sean bienvenidos a una nueva sesión en lo que es la semana virtual del Conrecit. Estamos muy contentos de estar con ustedes. Mi nombre es Efraín Ricardes y soy gerente regional para Sage Publishing. Vamos a tener la sesión de esta hora con mi compañera Rebecca Evans, que ahorita voy a presentar. Es una sesión que va a ser en idioma inglés y espero que sea muy interesante, sobre cómo publicar en revistas internacionales revisadas por pares. Rebecca Evans es originaria del Reino Unido. Actualmente se desempeña como coordinadora de formación bibliotecaria en la oficina de Londres de Sage Publishing. Está a cargo de la región de Europa, Medio Oriente, África y América Latina. Durante casi una década ha trabajado en el campo editorial en diferentes áreas. Actualmente está encargada de capacitar al equipo comercial y gestiona la capacitación del usuario final de nuestros recursos y contenidos. Así que, como ven, tiene una amplia experiencia en lo que es el campo editorial y el proceso editorial. Sin más, los dejo con Rebeca. Le voy a dar la instrucción de que puede proceder. Rebecca, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Efrain. Gracias. Hola, everybody. Welcome to the session today. I'm really glad to have you here with us. I'm joining from London, so it's getting cold here in England, probably very different from Mexico. But I'm really happy to be here and to be part of your training week and your week of events this week. I can see some of the comments coming in, so buenos dias to everybody. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I want to get started with a little exercise. So before I go into present, and there are some instructions at the top of the screen here. So if you go to menti.com, and you'll be prompted to enter a code, and that code is just here. So 327485. You can do this on your mobile phone, or you can go in on your computer. And before we start, I'd just like to really understand who's joining us today. So the first question is to understand who you are. Are you an undergraduate? Are you a postgraduate? A researcher? Perhaps you're a faculty member, a professor, or maybe we have some librarians here today as well. So again, the instructions are at the top of the screen here, so you can use your mobile phone, or you can just go into a different window in your browser, however you're joining. And I'll give it just a moment for people to join and get connected, and then you can vote on your role. Okay, we've got our first person here, so welcome. And you're an undergraduate, so really lovely to have you here. Thanks for joining. I kind of understood a little bit of what Efren was saying, so I think he was describing my role. And maybe while people join the Menti, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and Sage. For those of you who aren't familiar, Sage is an international publishing company. So we have offices in Los Angeles, which was our first office, also in London, in Singapore, in India, in Dehradun in India, and also in Melbourne. So we're an international company. We were founded 55 years ago. So 1965 was when the company was founded. And we launched our company with one journal, and now we publish over 1,100 journals across all of the social sciences, so business and management, psychology, health sciences, nursing, education, media and communication, politics, criminology, lots and lots of different subject areas. And we don't just publish journals, we publish textbooks, we publish other library databases, lots around research methods. Research methods is one of our strengths and one of our strongest areas of publication. So that's a little bit about the company. And like I said, I'm based in the London office, although today I'm obviously at home because of the COVID pandemic. So this is my office, the home office, which is in London as well. And I'm the training manager, and I've been with Sage 5.5 years now. So really, my job is to support our sales team. It's to help people in the company understand what our products are and how to sell them and how to make sure they're being used as efficiently as possible. And also hosting sessions like this. So that's just a little bit about me. Okay, I'm going to give this slide just 15 more seconds, but it's great for me to see who we have here. So to those postgrads, undergrads, and faculty members, welcome to you all, and thank you for taking part. Let's move over to the next slide. So maybe there's a little icon that you can just click the button to move to the next question. And I'd really like to understand, which topics are you most interested in learning about today? You can only select one, so if it's everything, make sure you click the everything icon, which is at the bottom right of the screen. And as you vote, we should start to see some circles appear so we can get an understanding of what people are interested in. And don't worry if you're just joining us, you can join the Menti using the instructions at the top of the slide here. So just go to menti.com and you can enter that code, which I think should also have been put into the chat, but I'm not sure. Okay, so, and you know, today we only have an hour, right? And so I want to, I guess, manage some expectations that publishing a research paper and getting successfully published is a long process. It entails a lot of different things, and we can't cover everything. We're going to be looking at things at kind of a top level, I guess, like a general overview. I will share my slides with the event organizers so that those slides get shared with everybody. So if you're attending today, you will receive the slides. And there's lots more information which I will provide at the end of the presentation as well. So I guess see this as like a first introduction. And I hope that we can cover some of these things that you're all interested in learning about. But it looks like most of you, 60% of our 10 attendees who are participating in the Menti, you want to know everything that we've talked about here. So we're going to be looking at the general publishing process, some top tips on preparing your paper, how to choose the best journal, the submission process, like what does that actually look like, and then finally the peer review process as well, and a little bit of kind of how to handle it once your paper has been submitted and what you can do. Okay, so thank you guys so much for taking part in the Menti. It was great to hear from you and to understand who's in the session today. I'm going to come over to my slides now. So we've kind of already seen the agenda so far. So let's get started. Don't close that Menti window though, because we're going to take a break about halfway through, and I'd like to come and ask you a question, and we'll come back to it at the end as well, just to see what you've learned. But before we kind of dive into the publishing process, I'd like to really touch on something that's very important, but sometimes overlooked in the whole process of getting published, which is the importance of your methodology. So one of the first things that a journal will be looking for when it comes to publishing a paper is how good quality the methodology of that paper was. So it doesn't matter all of the rules that you follow, if you have the most beautiful paper, if it's perfectly formatted, if you followed all of the publishing guidelines, that's all great. But if your paper doesn't have a sound and solid methodology, and you haven't explained your methodology thoroughly, journal publishers are not going to want to publish your paper. And that is, of course, because journal publishers are responsible for upholding the quality of academic research, of scientific findings. So they have to know that that methodology is good. So, you know, when it comes to conducting publishable research in the first place, you really want to be focusing on the fundamentals. When it comes to methodology, your supervisor plays a really key role. You know, your supervisor is the person that's there to help you, especially when it comes to your research design and your methodology. Now, for the undergraduates here, you may not have a supervisor specifically. You may just have like a professor who's kind of guiding you through the process, but you can definitely go to them as your first person. You could also speak with other researchers, so other people in your department who have done research themselves and who have published their research. Maybe your university holds events. I mean, events like this one are fantastic for building your network of peers and other experts in your field. So reaching out to people who have published before is a really good step because you can learn about their first-hand experiences of publishing. And especially if you're an undergraduate, but I would say this to everybody here, no matter how long you have been researching, take advantage of your library. Your library is really there to help researchers do the best research they possibly can. You know, they will probably run training sessions or workshops about how to design your research project, maybe things like academic writing, how to prepare a manuscript, things like understanding open access, if that's something that is important to you, if you've been funded or if it's part of your personal principles. So definitely go and speak to your library. And then in addition to that, your library will offer, they will pay for very valuable databases and resources that will help you with doing research and doing the best research that you possibly can. That you might find books about research methods, you might find journals dedicated to research methodology. You know, how do I do the best research that I can? And databases as well. And so I just want to pause for a moment and tell you about one of our databases, Sage Research Methods. Now, I obviously don't know who you all are. I don't know which institution you come from, but it's possible that your library subscribes to our Sage Research Methods database. This is a library database that's dedicated to research methods. It's totally unique. There isn't really anything else like it out there. And you can see the research methods platform has resources dedicated to all of these questions, you know, writing your research question, choosing the best methods, carrying out your research, like if you've chosen to do survey research or focus groups, or maybe you're doing policy analysis, you will find resources on how to conduct all of those methods and many, many more. How to analyze your results once you've carried out your research, like how do I analyze a focus group, or how do I read a public policy document, you know? And then writing up your findings, academic writing, and thinking about publication. These are all topics that are covered within the Sage Research Methods database. Now, I'm going to include a link at the end of my slide, so don't worry too much, but you can maybe just write the name down of this database, and you might like to go and ask your library or go and check out your library catalogue and see if you do, your library does subscribe to Sage Research Methods, because I know I have to say this because I work for Sage, but honestly, it's a fantastic database and it's really invaluable for anybody doing research and hoping to get published. So really great for helping you to refine your skills, learn new skills, and really to justify the methodological choices that you've made in your research, which is a key part of then getting published. So that was just a quick kind of area that I wanted to focus on that is often ignored or overlooked. People often want to know, like, what are the top 3 things I can do to guarantee that my paper gets published? And unfortunately, there are no quick wins. It's all about writing the best research that you can, like conducting a thorough and methodologically sound research. Once you've done that, then you can start to think about how you can maximize your chances of being accepted by a journal. So let's start to look at what things you can do to help that process go more smoothly. Well, the first thing is really making sure that you choose the right journal. So for those of you who were here right at the start, when we were on that first Menti question, I told you that Sage publishes over 1,100 journals, and we're just one publisher. And so imagine if you think of all the other publishers that you may have heard from this week, other publishers that you might be familiar with, multiply all of those journals by all of those publishers, and you realize just how many journals there are out there in the world that you could submit your paper to. So how do you choose the best journal? Well, the first thing to be aware of, especially if you're perhaps an undergrad or you're in your early years of postgraduate study, when you submit your academic paper, you can only submit to one journal at a time. So it's a general guideline with any good quality, peer-reviewed, really credible journal that they will not accept a paper that is under review by another journal. So you basically have to make a priority list. You have to identify suitable journals and you have to prioritize them. And you would submit to the most relevant journal and hope that they accept your paper. But if they don't, then you can move to your second and you can submit to your second journal. So you can't, it's not like job applications where you can send your CV to 10 different companies. You have to choose your preferred journal and go through them one at a time. So this is why this is such a crucial step. So you want to think about things like, which journals do you read and cite regularly? This is a really good step because typically the journals that you cite regularly in your own assignments and your own research are typically going to be publishing the kinds of research that are of interest to you as an individual and as a researcher. And so thematically, those journals are probably going to be very relevant to the research that you are writing. So that's a really good first step. And kind of tied into that, which journals focus most closely on your field of research? You know, as an example, there are some very niche, very specific journals out there. And actually, the more specific you can get, the better, because, of course, the more specific a journal is, probably the more selective they will be. And so think about it. If you are, for example, a researcher in neuropsychology in adolescence, you probably are going to have a higher chance of being accepted by an adolescent neuropsychology journal than a general psychology journal. Because even though your paper might be relevant to the general psychology journal, that general psychology journal will be accepting loads of papers because it's so broad. Whereas if you're submitting to a very specific journal that's very closely related to your topic, there's probably fewer submissions and you probably have a higher chance of getting accepted. So you really want to go and explore those really specific titles that correlate closely with your area of expertise. Think about the publisher's reputation. Now, again, we only have an hour today. You really want to look for journals that are peer-reviewed. Okay, so the big journal publishers like Sage, all of their journals are peer-reviewed. You want to be on the lookout for predatory journals, so journals that really don't have an editorial board. Maybe their website doesn't look very good quality. Maybe their journals aren't indexed in the places that you go to look for articles yourself. Those are all kind of red flags that the journal might be a predatory publisher and they might not be very good quality. And again, this is where your supervisor and your library can be really helpful in helping you identify a good quality, credible journal publisher. Once you've found a few journals, and you're probably again building up a short list, a list of maybe 20 journals at the moment, you can look at like who is the editor and who's on the editorial board. Maybe somebody on the editorial board of this journal is a faculty member at your institution. And that it could be great because you might be able to send them an email and ask them for some advice. And looking at who's on the editorial board, which is generally like professors and faculty members from all over the world, will give you an idea of what their areas of interest are. Again, it will give you some ideas of the quality of the journal, because if you've got lots of great institutions represented on the editorial board, like ITESM or, Yale University, these are all really good indicators of a quality journal. And another thing you might want to think about as researchers in Mexico is how international is the journal's scope. One problem within academia is how Western-centric it is. It's just a fact that a lot of journals predominantly publish English-speaking academics and research from English institutions, so from the States and from England and from Australia. And it's an unfortunate fact, but one thing you can do is maybe explore the editorial advisory board. You can look at past issues of that journal and see what authors have been published in it before and get a sense of how international it seems. And as a Mexican researcher, that might give you a bit of confidence in submitting your paper to that journal. And finally, do you know anyone who's published in the journal? Again, this is where your networks become really powerful. Speaking with your library, speaking with your supervisor or other researchers at your university or in your network, you can learn from people who have worked with that journal before, and they might tell you that they had a really bad experience. They might tell you they had a really good experience, but you can learn a little bit from people. So like with research and your academic career, it's really valuable to take advantage of the people that you know. So by now, perhaps you have a short list of potential journals using those criteria. Maybe you have 15 to 20 journals, but what you really want to do is narrow those down to maybe like 5 journals, and you want to prioritize those so you have an order from your top, the journal you would most like to submit to and be published in, through to maybe your final choice. So once you've created your shortlist, things that you can use to narrow down your choices, read the overall journal description. You should on their website find their aims, their scope, and their subject area. The journal there should describe like what types of papers do we publish? Do we publish interdisciplinary research? Do we publish case studies? Lots of different things that the journal might publish or they might not publish. And that can help you get an idea of where your research fits best. Are they a member of COPE? Now, COPE is the Committee of Publication Ethics, and COPE is a voluntary thing. Journals can apply to be a member of COPE as a way of kind of affirming their belief in certain values around ethics of publication. So if you have a journal that is a COPE member, that's a really good sign. That is a green flag. It suggests that that journal takes publishing ethics seriously and applies standards. They voluntarily put themselves up for an audit. So that can be a really good thing to look out for. Of course, impact factor. We know an impact factor is about really the cumulative number of citations that articles within a journal amass over time. So it's not the only way of judging quality, but within the world of academia, impact factors are seen as quite important. And if you're, thinking about promotion or tenured positions in the future, then high impact factors are often rewarded in terms of career. So that might be something that you want to consider. Likewise, impact factors can be used to rank journals. So if we go back to our example earlier about a neuropsychology journal, there are organizations that look at all the neuropsychology journals that are published, and they rank them in terms of the number of citations within that journal. So you can see the highest ranked journal, which is the one with the most citations, and the lowest ranked journal. And you can look at your journals on your shortlist and see how well ranked they are. And obviously, the higher rank your journal has, the more likely your paper is to be cited by other researchers. And of course, that's a really important part of being published. So it's an important consideration. And finally, open access. And this will depend on your situation, whether you are personally funding your research or whether you've been funded by the government or your institution or an organization. All of those things will dictate or influence how you need to publish your work, whether you publish open access or whether you can publish in a paywalled journal. Now, we could have a whole 2-hour session on open access. We don't have a lot of time for that, but we have lots of information on our website if you want to learn a bit more about open access. And I would also recommend speaking to your library, because libraries know a lot about open access. So if you want a bit of information about open access publishing, go and speak to your library as well. And you can also find out how long the process would take for publication, especially if you are a funded researcher. You may actually have a publication deadline, and then you might actually want to prioritize journals who can commit to publishing your paper in a shorter time frame. And another really good thing and a practical step you can take is to review previous issues of the journals in your shortlist. And you can look for things like, do they publish work similar to your paper? You know, themes, topics, format, tone. Do you get the sense that your work would fit into the journal? Do you like their style? And can you really see your paper fitting into that journal? That, by reading past papers published in your shortlisted journals, can be a really good step. We're going to come and talk about individual journal submission guidelines in a moment, but another really important thing to look at is, can you meet those guidelines? Do you have everything that is required to meet the submission guidelines of your shortlisted journals? Because that's really important. And it's one thing that journals use to very quickly accept or reject a paper. And we'll come and talk about these in just a moment. So by now, you should hopefully have a short list of maybe 3 to 5 journals, high quality, peer-reviewed, credible publishers, very specific to your area of research. And hopefully you've prioritized that list so you know the first journal you want to submit your paper to, you have that ready, and hopefully you will get accepted. If not, you can move to the second journal on your list, and so on. So in terms of writing your paper, this is it's a really interesting one. I mean, again, your library might offer workshops on things like academic writing, but I just wanted to share a couple of tips with you, again, bearing in mind we have such a short amount of time today. When you read an article, you know, a finished journal paper, this is the format that it typically follows in terms of like reading through the paper chronologically. You have the title, and then you have an abstract, a little summary of the paper. You often see a selection of keywords, which is what the paper is about. And then you have the main text, which is your introduction, your methodology, discussion about your results, your conclusion, what conclusion are you drawing? And then things like any acknowledgements, further reading references, and supporting materials, perhaps like an appendix or a data set or other things like that. But what we often find, and I'm sure and I remember this now, I was not a researcher, but I went to university and I did my undergraduate degree. I studied English literature, so I had to write a lot of essays. And I remember, you would sit down and you would think, right, what am I going to call my paper? And you would spend a day thinking about what the perfect title for your paper should be before you've even written a word. And you would write a title and you would write an introduction. And then, of course, you spend weeks writing this paper, the main body of the text. You edit it daily. It changes form about 80 times. So that then later you have to go back to your introduction and rewrite it completely because your paper has changed so much. And then you look at your title and you say, well, my title no longer reflects the paper that I wrote because the writing process has changed everything so dramatically. That's really normal. So what I really want to help you think about is, how do you write your paper as efficiently as possible without worrying about all of those mistakes? So what I would really advise is to think, when writing, start from the bottom up. Okay, so you're going to start with your data and your findings. Now, that's going to depend on your research project. If you are doing public policy analysis, it's going to start with your analysis of those policies. You're going to be pulling apart the key strategies within that policy, the key terms. If you've done a survey, it's going to be your survey data. Okay, so that's kind of where you start from. Then you want to think about, well, how am I going to present these findings to my reader? You're not just going to share it in its raw form. You need to think about reformatting that data so it's reader friendly. That might be figures, it might be visualizations like tables and graphs, it might be summaries of documents, things like that. Once you've done that, you can write up kind of the main body of the text, your methods, like what methods did you use, going back to a really sound methodology as we talked about earlier. What results did you find, discussing those results, the impact that they have on the field that you work in, the importance of these findings for your academic community within your discipline, other areas of research that future researchers can look at. Okay, so you've done all of that. You haven't yet looked at your abstract and your title. You have not yet done your introduction and your conclusion. Don't touch those last three things, your conclusion, your introduction, or your abstract or your title, until you are happy with the main body of the text. Because once you're happy with the main body of the text, it's going to become very easy and quick for you to quickly write your conclusion, which is, what have I said? Then write your introduction, which is, what am I going to say? And it's already written, so you know that you can write the introduction basically once and it's ready. And finally, you can finish with your abstract and your title, which you know are going to be very quick because everything else is already ready and prepared. Now, of course, your paper, when it's finished, looks like a traditional academic paper. It's just thinking about the order in which you write these things in order to save yourself some time. Because as we all know, whether it's assignments at the undergrad level or your master's or PhD thesis, you have months and months to prepare, but you're always writing until the last minute. So we want to think about, how can we do this as efficiently as possible? Now, in today's world, most journal papers and journal articles are hosted online, and they're discovered online through systems like Google Scholar, or through your library catalog, or maybe databases like PubMed Central. And of course, the way that people find your work is searching. Like when we all go and search on Google, it's a bit like search engine optimization. Companies need to think, like, what is somebody going to search in order to find our website? You need to think in the same way. What is somebody going to search for to find my paper? And this is really important, and you need to think about these keywords and put them into your title and your abstract, because it's your title and your abstract that academic search engines use to kind of bring up your paper in search results. So you might put keywords throughout your main body like neuropsychology, but if you don't use the word neuropsychology in your title and your abstract, it's very unlikely that your paper will be brought up in search results, or they'll be right at the bottom of the search results. So the better your title and your abstract, the more your work is going to be found, read by other researchers, and of course cited by other researchers. And this is what's really important about getting published, is getting your work out there, found and cited. So you need to think about what your audience would be searching for in order to find a paper like yours, a paper on your topic. Choose those words and try out some tests, like go to Google Scholar, go to your library catalogue and test out your keywords. And are you getting the same kind of research as your paper? If you are, that suggests that your keywords are well chosen. If you're not, you maybe need to think about synonyms. You maybe need to think about more common alternatives that people might be using to find your paper. And you need, once you've chosen your keywords, there are usually like 3 or maybe like 5 to 10. Often your journal will give you an indication of how many keywords you should submit. And you will submit your keywords as part of the submission process. So this is all part of the preparation. And when you've chosen those keywords, you want to include them in your article title. In your abstract there, you would want to choose your top 3 or 4 words, and all throughout your paper, but without losing the natural flow of language. So this is it's a fine balance, finding those keywords, using them enough that they are kind of prominent enough that search engines will find your paper, but not so much that they affect the readability of your paper, and editors and readers will be like, this feels awkward, you know. But that's really important. And like I say, you are going to have to submit your keywords when you submit your paper and your manuscript. So this is all stuff you can be thinking about while you're preparing your paper. So I'm going to come out of my slides and come back into Menti, and let's go on to the next slide, which is, and again, if you closed Menti earlier, don't worry, you can follow the instructions highlighted at the top here. So when you're going to identify some suitable journals in the future, which criteria are you going to use? And maybe you can pick your top 1, or you can select as many as you like. So let's just see kind of what people have been thinking about so far. And you can join the Menti just by going to menti.com and entering the 6-digit code there. So what things will you be paying attention to when you build your journal shortlist for publication? Can see a few here. I noticed also we had some more people who had joined the Menti, so welcome to you. I hope you're enjoying the session so far. We've got lots of information that we're going through, but like I said at the beginning, the slides will be shared. I'll be sharing them with the organizer. So don't worry too much if it feels like a lot of information. That's totally normal, and you'll be getting the information later. Great, so let's just have a quick review. I really like this visualization, by the way. It's nice to kind of see the weighting of different criteria. So a lot of people are saying journals I read and cite regularly, the impact factor and other quantitative rankings of the journal. Yeah, those are all really good. Next, who's on the editorial board and what is the journal's specific aims and scope, also really good. And yeah, maybe open we Well, you can keep answering those questions. Let's carry on. And again, you can keep Menti open because we're going to do one last question at the very end, just because I'd like to really learn what your key takeaways from today's session are. Efren, do we have any questions that are worth answering right now? I've just come into the chat to take a look, but I don't see anything in the private chat. I guess no, I don't think we have many questions, so I'm going to carry on. Okay, so we've thought a little bit about kind of preparing your paper. Hopefully by now you've written up a fantastic paper, you've chosen your keywords, it's ready to go, and you've got your journal shortlist. So you've done an amazing job so far. So now you're really ready to choose your top journal and submit your paper. So what happens now? I mentioned earlier that one of the criteria you need to think about is whether you can adhere to the submission guidelines of your chosen journal. And I want to expand on this a little bit. And you may be shocked to know, okay, so Sage, as I've mentioned a couple of times, we publish over 1,000 journals, okay? And we're one publishing company with over 1,000 journals. Not all of our journals follow the same submission guidelines, even though they are all published by Sage. Some of our journals, for example, they might want you to submit your paper in Arial font, size 12, double spaced, and they might want you to include all of your appendices and all of your data and graphs in one single Word document. Another journal of ours might want you to submit in Times New Roman, font size 10, single spaced, and they might want you to submit your appendices in separate documents. So you have your paper in one document, your data in another document, your references in another document, okay? Now, you're probably really surprised, and it's totally normal. You would think that one publisher would have the same guidelines for all of their journals. The reason is complicated. It's because some of the journals we own ourselves and some are owned by like academic societies. So it's kind of like we publish on their behalf, but they're not fully 100% Sage journals. But that's by the by. What you need to know is every time you submit a manuscript, you need to check the submission guidelines of that journal and you need to follow them 100%. So different journals have these different submission rules. Each of your journals that you submit to is going to have its submission guidelines publicly available. They're usually found on the journal website. So this is just a screenshot from one of Sage's journals, the California Management Review. It's a really prestigious management journal published out of the University of California, Berkeley Haas School of Business. And you could click on Submit Paper, and there you will find all the submission guidelines for that specific journal. Most submissions, once you've found their guidelines and you have reformatted your paper for that journal, they're done through an automatic website. The two main ones are Manuscript Central, which is what 99% of our journals use, or Scholar One. It's kind of like, what's the best way? It's kind of like Amazon. Okay, personally, I don't like to support Amazon, but it's the best, most universal example I can think of. When you place an order or you submit your paper, you can track where it's going. So you can see, okay, my paper's been accepted for review. So it's under review, and then you can see what happens next. And you have transparency over where your paper is in the process, kind of like order tracking in Amazon. If you get through to peer review, you can also use these systems to communicate with your peer reviewers. So if they have a comment, they will send it to you through Manuscript Central, and you'll be able to message them back with comments. You'll be able to make changes to your paper there, and everything related to your paper is all handled within this one system. It's just much more secure than emails, which is probably how it was done 15 years ago, you know, so it keeps everything in one place. So remember, imagine you've submitted your paper to journal number 1, your top priority journal. If they unfortunately reject your paper and you go down to your second preferred journal, you need to go and check journal number 2's submission guidelines, and you will often need to reformat your manuscript to suit the submission guidelines of journal number 2. Okay, you don't need to necessarily change your actual paper, but you might need to change the font, the formatting, the file types, perhaps maybe Word to PDF, you know, little things like that. So all of that stuff is really important. And again, these submission guidelines, it's a bit like spelling mistakes on a CV when you're applying for a job. It's one of the first criteria that a journal editor will look at and say, if they haven't bothered to read our submission guidelines, we're not going to proceed with the paper, because they have so many submissions to work through. They need quick ways of kind of rejecting papers and getting through to the quality stuff. So that's a really good thing. It's an investment worthy of your time, definitely. Okay, so you've reformatted your paper, you've checked the submission guidelines one more time, you've checked all your formatting, you've had it proofread perhaps by your supervisor or a kind friend who you can offer to buy a pizza for as a thank you. Submit to your first journal, and then you wait. And I know there's going to be a question come up in the chat. How long do I wait for once I've submitted my paper? And unfortunately, there's no answer to that question. Now, a lot of journals will give you a rough guideline in their kind of journal overview page. So on their website, it might give some information about the typical time frame from submission through to acceptance, okay? But the reason that we can't really give you a clear answer is, well, first of all, some journals only have 500 subscribers and they only get 30 paper submissions every week. Other journals have 100,000 subscribers and they get 500 submissions every week, okay? So there's huge differences and a huge variation in journals out there. The other thing is, you don't know how long you're going to spend at this middle phase, which is the review, revise, resubmit process, okay? So if your paper does go through to review and your peer reviewers come back and say, we like your paper, the methodology is sound, we really think it could contribute to this field, but there needs to be some revisions, and you might go through that cycle 3 to 4 times. That's totally normal. So that's why it's very difficult to say, okay, from acceptance to publication is 12 weeks, because you might go through the revision process once, or you might go through it 5 times. It's impossible to tell at the very beginning. But this just gives you an idea of what process your paper is going to go through. Yes, so, and often in today's world, I mean, most papers stop at online publication. Lots of journals are moving to online only. So once your paper is kind of accepted after the revision process, your paper will be put online and it's ready to read. So in terms of peer review, you know, once you submit your paper, there's the initial decision first, and desk reject, which is an immediate rejection with no changes. You know, they just come back to you and they say, we're really sorry, but we're not going to take this paper forward. They should give you some feedback. So they should tell you why they're rejecting it immediately. Read that feedback and learn from your mistakes. And then, of course, you can go and submit the paper to your second preferred journal. Or the second initial decision is that it goes to peer review. Now, and as like I said, all good quality journals are peer reviewed. They will not just accept your paper immediately, okay? Like they won't just publish it the next week because they like it. It's a standard part of the scientific process to do peer review on an academic paper. So If your paper goes through to peer review, what this means is the journal editor sends out your paper to 2 or 3 referees. Now, these peer reviewers are basically faculty. They are experts in the field that you are publishing in and researching on, probably experts in your very specific topic like neuropsychology, and they blind, so they have no identifying information about you as an individual. They just receive your manuscript and they read that and they make their comments, and they put their individual comments forward to the editor. The editor then receives those 2 to 3 reports. This is all done anonymously, so the 3 reviewers don't see the other reviewers' comments and they don't know who you are as a researcher. So the editor gets these 2 to 3 comments, very in-depth reports on your paper. Should they take it forward? If so, what does it need to be publishable? And that's what you would call your peer review decision. Now, from here, again, if both or all 3 of your peer reviewers say, look, the methodology wasn't good enough, or there was something else wrong with the paper, we don't think it's worth carrying forward, then you can still get rejected after peer review. That is one outcome. More likely, you'll be accepted with either major revisions or minor revisions, or very rarely, your peer reviewers will say, this is publishable tomorrow. We would recommend it just gets published. There are no changes required. Again, this is very rare. Most of the time, once you're in peer review, you're going to be accepted with major or minor revisions. So how do you handle those revisions? You know, you're going to be given a report and like a letter from the editor where they will give you some feedback, whether this is a rejection or it's the outcome of peer review. So read that carefully. This will really help you to understand where you've gone wrong or what needs to happen to improve your paper, to keep it going through the peer review process. They will often give time frames, and it's really important that you stick to those, because journals typically have like publishing schedules for 6 to 9 months worth of issues going forward. They might have a special issue in 3 months that your paper would be perfect for, and they want to get it turned around ready for that issue. Or maybe the next 2 issues are full, but they have a space in the next upcoming one, so they want to get you through quickly. So really try and meet those time frames that are requested. Be very clear about what you've changed. Usually you will get a report of what needs to be improved, and you should write a cover letter that says, in reference to point 1, I changed this. In reference to point 2, I went back and did this. I can't actually change point 3 because it's not feasible. Maybe it was part of your original research and you can't ethically go back, but you can at least talk about it and explain why, and then you could write about it in the paper and address it as a weakness of your methodology. So go through your feedback and really address all of the feedback point by point, because that shows that you're engaging with the process and you understand the importance of the changes. And if you can't meet those criticisms, explain why. Be positive and polite. You know, publishers aren't these like big machines. It's not like Amazon in that way. The editors are just people like me, who I'm not an editor, but we're just employees of Sage or another publishing company. We have good days, we have bad days. We're going through a pandemic and we're working from home. So having a nice, friendly, constructive interaction with our authors is going to go a long way in developing that relationship, you know. And don't worry that it's very normal to go through the revision process a number of times. So just be patient and keep going. It's not a negative thing about you. It's part of upholding the quality of academia and scientific outcomes. So finally, I'd like to finish today by thinking about how to handle acceptance and rejection. So what if it goes right, if your paper gets accepted by a journal? Well, first of all, celebrate, however that works for you. Today, probably like a Zoom call with your family and friends and hopefully a glass of champagne or something. It's a big moment and a very proud moment, especially if it's your first paper. So definitely take some time to celebrate and be proud of yourself. But then you really want to think about promoting your paper. A published paper is only as good as how much it's out there. You know, it's kind of like you publish a book, but if nobody buys it or reads it, you know, what impact does it have? So how can you promote your paper? Well, this is just a couple of examples. Again, your library and your supervisor will be able to give you some great advice. Ask your library if you can tweet about it on their library channel, post about it on the university website. Maybe you can submit to go and do a speech at a conference, maybe like a virtual conference right now. You might have a blog that you could post on. Look for opportunities for getting your paper out there. The journal publisher will do a lot, you know, to get it out there, but it's also your responsibility to promote your paper as well. And if your paper gets rejected, you know, that is a shame, but it's also very common, especially early on in your career. And you can really learn from your mistakes, you know, from the reasons that your paper got rejected. Common reasons that papers do get rejected: the peer reviewers aren't convinced that it actually contributes to your discipline. Maybe your research wasn't original enough. Maybe it had already been done before. Well, then in the future, you can think about identifying more unique topics of areas that have not been covered in the past. Methods, again, we've said before, methodology is a big one. If the methods aren't sound, then the journal can't ethically publish that paper. Maybe the writing of a specific section is too weak, like your conclusion or your discussion. And again, if you've got a very in-demand journal, they have a lot of papers that they have to go through, then unfortunately the written style and the quality of your paper is going to potentially get you rejected. So do take advantage of any kind of academic writing services or support at your university. Bad grammar and written style. So if your paper is rejected, and this is maybe to finish on a negative note, but I hope not, but just to think about if your paper does get rejected, stay calm, read the report that you will receive, or if they don't send one, you can ask for feedback, you know, just send a polite email asking for some feedback. You can try and then go back to your paper and rework it according to their recommendations. And then you can consider submitting it to an alternative journal, maybe one where it's better suited. But don't forget to reformat it for your new journal's submission guidelines. And sometimes it's better to just start again and write a whole new paper, maybe new research or just the same research, but start your paper completely from scratch. One thing I really recommend is reading research articles critically, like go through them and think, what makes this a good journal article? What makes this not such a good journal article? And try and use real published work as a model for your own writing, for your own structure, for your own argumentative writing. So I've listed some resources that will be available on the slide. We talked about SAGE research methods. We also have a free online course that you've got the link there. Honestly, it's totally free and it's called How to Get Published. So I'm going to share this link with you guys through the slides. So presumably you'll get those today or next week once the event organizers send them round. And I would really recommend you register for that. It's all interactive learning and it will give you a bit more information of what we've talked about today. So just for our last 2 moments, you can come back to the mentee, and I would just like to know kind of what's the most useful thing you have learned today. And we also can answer any questions that have maybe come in on the comments. Again, Efren, I can't quite come over to the chat while I'm on Menti and sharing my screen. But if there are any questions on the chat or the comments, we can go through those now as well.
Yeah. Do you hear me, Rebecca?
I can hear you.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. The first one is the rejection rate could be a factor to weight in journal selection?
Sorry, could you say that again? I don't fully understand the question.
Yeah, it refers if the rejection rate could be a factor to select journals.
Oh, I see what you mean. So as a selection criteria, looking at the rejection rate, it could be. That's a fantastic question, whoever asked that. But not many journals will make their rejection rate publicly available. I've never really seen that on a publisher's website. So, I mean, you could try contacting the journal editors. Usually their email addresses are on the website of the journal. So you could try and ask them, but that might be quite time consuming. And
the second question is if it's possible and where to find journal data in submissions per year. How many submissions are sent to a specific journal?
Interesting. Yeah. So that's quite a similar question, isn't it? And to be honest, I mean, you could go and check with your library. Your library might have some information about that. But the other way would, if they don't make it publicly available on the website, then emailing the journal editor is the best step. And like I said, most journals list the editor's email address on their website, so you should be able to contact them and just send them a polite request.
And that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Efren. Those are great questions. Well, I will say thank you so much because I know we're right on time and perhaps you guys have another event to go to. My email address is in the slide, so if anyone wants to contact me, once you have the slides, my email address is in there, and I'd be very happy to hear from anybody. And thank you so much for coming along and engaging. I know it was a lot of information, but I really hope that it was useful and an enjoyable session. And thank you to the organisers for inviting me to take part and for having Sage along to your event. And I hope that your final day goes really well.
Thank you, Becca.
Thanks, Efren. Gracias a todos.
Gracias a todos. Saludos.